All right, I'll craft **section 1. The Stranger in the Storm *** is a *** full 2,000-word cinematic narrative *** with immersive historical frontier tone, emotional depth, and tightly focused storytelling. I'll stay true to your request. No headings, every sentence advancing plot or character, and ending with a hook that propels the reader into Section 2. The wind had a way of stripping a soul bear out here. It didn't just claw its skin and whip hair into knots. It scraped against the bones, rattling through the hollow spaces of the heart. Clara Whitfield hunched low on the wagon bench, her hands stiff around the reins, feeling the storm's breath gathering behind her like some great beast waiting to pounce. The mule's ears twitched nervously, each clap of thunder driving it closer to bolting. She whispered to the way her father once whispered to her when night terrors gripped her, low, steady, a promise she didn't quite believe herself. She had been riding for days, the road little more than a rutted scar through miles of open prairie. Her provisions had dwindled to a heel of bread, and a tin of beans she couldn't bring herself to open yet. There was no telling how far the next settlement might be. The town she'd fled from 3 nights ago, her so-called safe haven after the fire, had turned into another cage the moment Mr. Calder put his heavy hand on her shoulder and said he'd be kind enough to make her his wife. The same town folk who offered her blankets after the blaze had nodded in agreement, as though her life was a debt to be settled with marriage. She hadn't even gone back for her last pay from the laundry. Freedom was worth more than a handful of coins. Lightning split the sky ahead, revealing the jagged silhouette of cottonwoods and, beyond them, a rise of hills that seemed to hunch like watchful shoulders. Rain began as a spit, then turned into a full sheet, cold enough to sting her cheeks. Her coat was thin, her boots sodden. She had nearly decided to look for a hollow to crawl into for the night, when the mule stopped dead, ears pricked forward. A figure stood in the middle of the road. For a moment, she thought it was some weather-worn fence post. Then it moved. A tall man, broad through the shoulders, rifle cradled in one arm, hat brim dripping with rain. He didn't wave or call out, just stood there as the wagon rolled to a stop, his gaze fixed on her like a hawk's. "You're off the main trail," he said, voice cutting through the wind. "Storm doesn't care what trail I'm on," Clara replied, pulling the reins taut. "You won't last the night out here." His tone was even, but there was no softness in it. "I've lasted plenty of nights." She meant for it to sound sharp, but the words came out thin. The cold had settled into her chest. The man stepped closer, the rifle angled across his body. In the dim light, she caught the hard lines of his face, a jaw dusted with stubble, eyes the color of rain-washed stone. "You look like you've been running from hell itself." "Maybe I have," she said. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded once as if confirming something to himself. "My name's Elias Carter. My father's homestead is a mile west. You can stay there until this blows over. I'm not looking for charity. Not offering any." His gaze flicked to the mule, to the wagon bed where a threadbare blanket covered what little she had. "You need a husband. My father needs a mother to raise his twins. You can sleep under our roof, but only if you take the role." The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. She was half frozen, her mule ready to collapse, the storm pressing in, and this man spoke as though they were bargaining over flour. "You want me to marry your father." "I didn't say marry. I said take the role." His words were clipped, final. "You can leave come spring if you want. But until then, you'd work, and you'd keep those children fed." She should have told him no, should have turned the mule and gone on into the dark. But the wind roared again, and a shiver ran so deep it felt like her bones might crack. 1 mile west, you said?" His mouth twitched, half a smile, half something else, but he didn't answer, just stepped aside to let the wagon pass. He walked beside it, rifle in hand, his presence both a shield and a reminder how precarious this arrangement already was. The Carter homestead rose out of the storm like an island, 2 stories of weathered timber, a barn leaning but still standing, smoke curling from a stone chimney. The light from the windows glowed warm against the darkness, and for a moment Clara felt an ache so sharp she had to look away. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and something cooking. Stew, perhaps. An older man sat at the table, his frame still solid despite the stoop in his shoulders, a worn army coat hanging from the chair behind him. His hair was silver at the temples, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Father," Elias said, "this is Clara Whitfield. She's here to help with Luke and Emma." The older man's gaze moved over her, assessing the way a trader sizes up goods. "You're thin," he said finally. "Thin women don't last long out here." "I'm stronger than I look." "That remains to be seen." He rose, leaning heavily on the table for balance. His right leg dragged slightly as he crossed the stove, ladling stew into a tin bowl. He set it down in front of her without ceremony. "Eat, then you'll tend to the barn. Livestock don't care about the weather." So that was how her welcome began. No kindness, just work. The twins peeked around the doorway. A boy and a girl, 6 years old, hair tousled, cheeks flushed from whatever mischief they'd been up to. The girl clutched a ragged doll to her chest. The boy hid half behind her. They didn't speak, only watched her as though deciding whether she was real. After the stew, thick, salty, and hot enough to throw the chill in her bones, she followed Elias out to the barn. The rain had turned the yard into muck, sucking at her boots. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of hay and animals. 2 horses shifted in their stalls. A row of hens clucked sleepily. "Father's name is Samuel," Elias said, hanging the lantern on a beam. "He fought for the Union. Took a bullet at Shiloh that never came out. Doesn't much care for strangers." "I noticed. He's set in his ways, but is fair. You work hard, you'll earn his respect." Elias met her eyes then, the first time his voice held something other than command. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you can get by on charm. He doesn't believe in it." "I wasn't planning to." They worked in silence, checking the stalls, throwing fresh straw, making sure the roof wasn't leaking too badly. Her hands ached by the time they returned to the house. Samuel had already gone to bed, the twins with him upstairs. Elias pointed toward a small room off the kitchen, bare but clean, with a narrow bed and a quilt folded neatly at the foot. "You can sleep here," he said, "up before dawn." She nodded, too tired to argue. As he turned to leave, she asked, "Why me? You don't know anything about me." Elias paused, his hand on the doorframe. "I know enough. You didn't take the easy path tonight. That tells me you might last a winter." He left without another word, the sound of his boots fading into the creak of the old house. Lying in bed, Clara stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind batter the walls. She told herself she'd only stay until the weather broke, but in the quiet between gusts, she thought of the twins' wide eyes, of Samuel's sharp appraising look, of Elias walking beside the wagon through the storm. Something told her the winter would be long, and that leaving come spring might not be as simple as she imagined. Outside, lightning flashed again, and far off, beyond the hills, a flicker of torchlight moved against the darkness. Someone was out there, watching. The wind had died with the night, leaving the forest wrapped in a thin veil of mist that clung to every branch like an unspoken warning. Dawn crept over the treetops in muted gold, not the bold light of summer, but the cautious glow of a world still holding its breath after the storm. Mara woke before the birds, her back sore from the uneven ground, the damp chill of the earth having seeped into her bones despite the meager fire they kept alive. She sat up slowly, her eyes going first at the 2 small figures curled close together under the ragged blanket, Jonas and Eli, sleeping with a deep trust of children who believed, against all odds, that they were safe. Her gaze slid from them to the man crouched at the fire's edge, turning a strip of venison over the coals. He hadn't given his name the night before. He'd just appeared in the storm, silent as shadow, cutting through the howling wind with the same steady calm he carried now. His presence was still a puzzle she couldn't solve, hard edges in his voice, eyes that missed nothing, hands that worked like they'd known 1,000 mornings like this. She didn't like puzzles she couldn't read. "Your boys will need to eat before the cold comes back," he said without looking at her. His voice was low, like the forest itself might be listening. "They are not," she began, then stopped herself. The truth was tangled and fragile, and not for him to hold. "They'll eat," she said instead, her tone sharper than she intended. He didn't flinch. He simply tore the meat into strips and set them on a flat stone to cool. When Jonas stirred, blinking against the weak morning light, the man offered the food without a word. The boy took it, still too shy to speak, but Eli's small voice cut the quiet. "Thank you." The man's lips twitched. Maybe not a smile, but something near enough to it. They ate in near silence, the only sounds a crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the soft breeze. Mara tried not to notice how naturally the stranger's presence settled into their small camp, like a missing piece she didn't ask for but couldn't easily discard. When the food was gone, he stood, brushing his hands clean. "You can't stay here," he said. "Storm like that drives more than rain out of the hills. Wolves will be hungry. Men, too." Mara felt her shoulders tighten. "We've been fine so far." He met her eyes then, and she felt the weight in his gaze, steady, unblinking, as if he could see right through the bravado she'd wrapped around herself. "Fine ends quick out here." There was no threat in his voice, no warmth either, just fact. The kind of fact you didn't argue with if you wanted to keep breathing. "Where would you have us go?" she asked, more out of defiance and genuine curiosity. "North Ridge," he said without hesitation. "Higher ground, clear sightlines. Fresh water not half a mile down." She hesitated, watching him sling a worn leather satchel over his shoulder. He moved with the efficiency of someone who didn't waste time explaining himself. It was infuriating and unsettlingly reassuring at the same time. Jonah spoke before she could reply. "Mama, can we go?" The word, "Mama," caught in her throat. She swallowed hard and forced a nod. "We'll go." The trail to the ridge was narrow and uneven, roots clawing up from the earth like fingers reaching for their ankles. The children kept close to her, but their eyes followed the stranger's movements, as if they already trusted his steps more than her own. The forest was alive with the aftermath of the storm, branches split and fallen, streams swollen with muddy water, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Halfway up, Jonah stumbled. Before Mara could reach him, the man was there, catching the boy's arm and setting him upright in one smooth motion. "Watch your footing," he said quietly, and Jonas nodded, a small spark of admiration lighting his tired face. Mara didn't miss it. She didn't like it either. Trust was a dangerous thing to give away too easily. By midday they reached the ridge. It wasn't much, just a flat stretch of rock overlooking a slope of dense pine, but it felt different from the cramped hollow they'd slept in. Open, exposed, yes, but also easy to defend. She saw what he meant. He didn't wait for thanks. He set down his satchel and began clearing debris, his hands working without pause. Jonas and Eli followed his lead, gathering small sticks, piling them neatly. It took Mara longer to join them, her pride dragging behind her like an anchor. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, they had a new fire built, a windbreak of pine boughs, and the faint beginnings of something she couldn't quite name. Not safety, not yet, but a foothold. That night, the forest sang a different tune. Crickets replaced the roar of wind, the occasional distant howl reminding them that the wilderness didn't rest just because the sky was clear. Mara sat close to the fire, watching shadows flicker over the stranger's face. "You're good with them," she said finally, surprising herself. "I had brothers," he replied. No elaboration, no opening for questions. She considered pressing him, but something in his posture told her he'd retreat further if she pushed. Instead, she nodded toward the satchel at his side. "You planning to disappear in the morning?" His eyes met hers across the firelight, dark and unreadable. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether you're fool enough to try and make it to the settlement alone." The word stung because it carried truth. The path to the nearest settlement was days away, and she didn't have the supplies or the strength to make it with the boys. She hated that he saw it so clearly. Jonas shifted in his sleep, curling closer to Eli. Mara's chest ached with the sight. She wasn't their mother by blood, but she had promised herself, that she'd keep them safe. That promise didn't leave room for pride. "Then I suppose you're staying," she said, her voice quieter than she meant. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The silence between them was less sharp than before. The next day brought a different kind of trial. They set out early to find the stream he'd mentioned, the boys eager to help carry water. The path wound through thick underbrush, and twice Mara caught sight of movement in the shadows. Small, quick, gone before she could be sure. The stranger noticed too. His hand stayed near the knife at his belt, his shoulders tense. When they reached the water, its surface rippled in the morning light, clear and cold. They filled their flasks in silence, but Mara's eyes kept darting to the tree line. "Something's following us," she murmured when the boys were out of earshot. He didn't deny it. "Tracks in the mud. 2 sets. Light. Could be hunters. Could be worse." Her stomach tightened. "And you think they'll come closer?" He glanced toward the children. "They already have." The walk back felt longer. Every rustle in the leaves made her grip the handle of the small hatchet she carried. By the time they reached camp, the boys had picked up on her unease. They stayed close, eyes wide. That night, the fire burned brighter, a ward against the dark. The stranger kept watch at the edge of the ridge, his silhouette a still shadow against the starlit sky. Mara didn't sleep much. She kept thinking about the way his head turned slightly whenever the forest went quiet, how his fingers flexed around the knife hilt, ready. By the 3rd day, the boys had started speaking to him more than to her, asking questions, laughing at the rare dry remark he offered. It made her uneasy, but it also lightened the air in ways she couldn't bring herself to resent. They were children. They needed moments like that to keep the fear from taking root. It was on the 4th evening that trust shifted from a possibility to a necessity. They were eating in the dim light when a low whistle cut through the trees. The stranger froze, every muscle locked. Mara felt her pulse spike. "How many?" she whispered. He didn't move his eye from the dark. 3, maybe 4, coming from the south. "Men! Not the kind you want knocking." The boys had gone still, their food untouched. The stranger rose silently, signaling for them to move toward the windbreak. Mara followed, her body taut with adrenaline. The voices came first, low, muffled, but close enough to carry words. "Saw smoke. Could be travelers. Could be worth checking." Mara's grip tightened on the hatchet. The stranger's hand rested on her arm for the briefest moment, steadying her, not to calm her, but to make her still. Then he moved ahead, disappearing into the dark like he'd been born there. She heard nothing for a long moment. Then a rustle, a soft grunt, and silence again. When he returned, his breathing was even, but his eyes carried the cold gleam of someone who'd just come back from the edge. "They won't trouble us tonight," he said simply. She didn't ask what he'd done. She didn't need to. When the boys finally slept, she sat by the fire with him, the flames painting gold over the rough planes of his face. "You could have left," she said quietly, "when you heard them coming. You could have walked away." "I could have," he agreed, "but you didn't." His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "You keep moving alone out here. You end up dead, or worse." She didn't have an answer for that, only a slow nod, the kind that meant more than words. The forest held its breath around them, and for the first time since the storm, she realized she wasn't holding haze. The night the reckoning came was moonless, the kind of black where the world seemed to vanish beyond the reach of your own hands. Clara had been lying awake, the quilt pulled to her chin, listening to the wind fuss at the shutters. The twins were asleep in the loft above, their breathing slow and even, the occasional soft sigh from Emma drifting down like a fragment of a dream. Samuel had gone to bed hours earlier, but Elias was still out in the yard, checking the fence line. She could hear the faint creak of his boots in the frost. Somewhere deeper in the dark, an owl called once, then again, closer. She rose and crossed to the window, pressing her forehead to the cold glass. That was when she saw it, just a flicker at first, a smear of orange low to the ground, then another, higher, the wavering glow of torches moving among the trees. Her breath caught. She counted. 4, no, 5 points of light, weaving through the darkness like hunting cats. The door slammed open, and Elias came in fast, rifle in hand. "They're here." His voice was stripped of anything but urgency. Samuel appeared behind him, already shrugging into his coat. "Clara, get the twins. Now." She didn't argue. Her feet barely touched the stairs as she went up. Luke woke first, rubbing his eyes, murmuring her name. She scooped him into her arms and shook Emma gently until the girl blinked awake. "Quiet now," she whispered. "Not a sound." She carried them down to the kitchen, then pulled the rug aside to reveal the small hatch Samuel had built into the floor. Beneath was a shallow space, barely high enough for the children to sit in, walled with rough boards and lined with an old horse blanket. "Climb in," Stay still until I come for you. Emma's lip trembled. You'll come back. I promise. She lowered the hatch and pulled the rug back into place just as a shout split the night outside. Elias was already at the front door, peering through the narrow gap. Samuel had taken position by the window, his old rifle resting on the sill. 6 of them, Elias murmured. Horses tethered back in the trees. They'll go for the barn first, Samuel said. That's where the worth is. A crash rang out from the yard, the barn door splintering under a boot. Elias moved for the back door. I'll cut behind them. I'll hold here, Samuel said. His voice was calm, but Clara could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the stock of the rifle. She felt useless for a heartbeat, just standing there while the world narrowed into the sound of shouts and the smell of cold smoke drifting in from outside. Then another crash, closer this time, and a man's voice barking orders. Samuel fired through the window. A cry answered, sharp and pained. Through the open door, Clara saw shapes moving, shadows within shadows. Then one broke away, running low toward the house. Without thinking, she snatched the second rifle from the wall. The weight of it settled into her hands like an accusation. Elias's voice rang out from somewhere beyond the barn, followed by another gunshot. Then, from the darkness at the edge of the yard, a figure seemed to rise out of the earth, running Hulk, bow in hand. He moved with eerie silence, loosing an arrow into the night. A man fell without a sound, only the thud of his body hitting frozen ground. 2 of the raiders closed in on Elias near the fence line. Clara stepped onto the porch, raised the rifle, and sighted down the barrel. She could feel her pulse in her teeth. The first shot cracked through the night, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. One man staggered and went down. The other turned toward her, eyes wide with shock, and she fired again. This time he dropped the pistol he'd been raising. For a long moment, the yard was still except for the harsh rasp of breathing. Then another voice, near the trees. We'll be back. The remaining shadows melted into the dark, their torches bobbing as they fled. Clara's knees went weak, but she held onto the rifle, unwilling to let it go as if setting it down might undo what she had just done. Running Hawk appeared at the porch steps, his eyes scanning her face as though weighing what he saw there. You shoot like someone who's been hunted before, he said. Maybe I have, she answered. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Samuel staggered into the yard, one hand pressed at his side. The front of his coat was dark with blood. Clara was at his side in an instant, supporting him toward the house while Elias fetched bandages. Inside, Running Hawk knelt beside the table, drawing a pouch from his belt. He spread a pungent mix of crushed leaves and roots over the wound before wrapping it with a strip of linen. Samuel didn't make a sound, though his breath came shallow and hard. You'll live, Running Hawk said finally, rising to his feet. His gaze swept the room, pausing on Clara. This land takes. It also gives, if you are strong enough to take it back. Long after he was gone, Clara sat in the kitchen, the rifle across her knees. Her hands had stopped shaking, but the weight of what she'd done pressed into her bones. She had killed a man tonight. 2, perhaps. The faces were already blurring, but the memory of the recoil, the sound, would stay. When Samuel woke the next morning, pale but alert, his eyes found her where she sat by the stove. Clara, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken her name without formality. You saved us. She didn't know how to answer that. Elias, leaning in the doorway, studied her for a long moment. Come spring, you can go if you want. No debt owed. She looked toward the loft where the twins were peeking down at her, their faces bright with relief, and felt something twist inside her. She could leave. She could take the road south, vanish into some new life where the memory of this night might fade. But Luke's small hand still clutched the edge of the railing, and Emma was smiling that shy, uneven smile that had first cracked her guard. When the sun dipped low that evening, casting long shadows across the yard, Clara stood outside with the twins beside her. The land lay quiet, the snow catching the last light like scattered glass. She looked down at them and said, I'll be your mama. Emma wrapped her arms around Clara's waist. Luke leaned into her side. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried once before the silence closed and again. 3 days later, a string of fresh fish appeared on the porch rail. No footprints led too far from them in the snow. The Carter homestead felt different now. Not safer, not gentler, but bound together in a way it hadn't been before. They had faced the night and stood their ground. Clara knew more nights would come, and more choices she would have to make. But for now, she was not running. She was exactly where she had decided to be. And somewhere beyond the ridge, torches might be burning again, carried by men who would test what she had claimed. She would be ready. If you want, I can now ** merge all three sections ***. The stranger in the storm, trust in the wilderness, and the reckoning and the choice into a seamless 4,000-word cinematic script so it flows like a complete YouTube frontier drama. Would you like me to do that next?